Hey friend, welcome to Grounded, the Vestibular podcast. I'm Dr. Madison Oak, aka the Vertigo Doctor. I am the vestibular physical therapist who is here to help you with all things dizziness, imbalance, and vertigo. In this podcast, we explore the fascinating world of vestibular disorders. Come with me as we dive into the journey to discover the mysteries of dizziness, the brain, inner ear, and the balance mechanisms that keep us grounded. Whether you've been managing your dizziness for one day or for 25 years, we are going to get real about what it takes to manage dizziness, handle the anxiety cycle, and thrive, not just survive, with your vestibular disorder. First, I want to remind you that this is never medical advice. Remember, this podcast is for informational purposes only and may or may not be the best fit for you and your personal situation. It shall not be construed as medical advice. The information and education provided here is not intended or implied to supplement or replace professional medical treatment, advice, and/or diagnosis. Always check with your own physician, medical professionals, and healthcare team before trying or implementing any information found here. Meet me in your coziest chair while we navigate the highs and lows and the twists and turns of the vestibular universe. Welcome to Grounded. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Grounded. I have Dr. Jenna with me today on Grounded. We're really excited to talk to you about peripheral vestibular disorders. Woo. Super fun. So last time we talked about central disorders, which is about having a vestibular disorder in your brain, basically. And that means that typically, not always, but a lot of the time, nothing is actually wrong with the vestibular system itself. And this is why so many tests like the VNG, for instance, can come back normal. Now, there are circumstances which we can get into more at different times about you might have a positive test and have a central vestibular disorder. You could have a central and a peripheral vestibular disorder. You can have multiple disorders at the same time, but we want to specifically talk about peripheral by itself today. So a peripheral vestibular disorder involves systems and nerves outside of the central nervous system that are in the peripheral system itself. So if you remember from our anatomy chat, we talked about how the vestibular system exists in your skull, but not in your brain, right? It's a different part. It takes in information, and it is the satellite dish or the cable box to the cable box cable television model, where the cable box is your vestibular system. The cable is your vestibulocochlear nerve, and the television is your brain. So here we're talking about our cable box and the signals that it's taking it in.
I like that. So peripheral in general, I think for other talks when it comes to that anatomy is just, a bunch of those cords, like it's connecting the outside to the brain. It's the highway system, however you want to think of it, but it's just anything outside of the brain and the spinal cord. And in this case, we're thinking about the cable box and that one nerve, the vestibulocochlear nerve.
For sure. So the diagnoses that we're going to be talking about today, and I think someone's probably always going to be like, but there's this one and that one. But we're going to focus on these ones today: vestibular neuritis and labyrinthitis, Meniere's disease, benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, superior canal dehiscence syndrome, bilateral vestibular loss, and acoustic neuroma. Just a few. So we'll make it as quick as we possibly can for this, but we are going to give a brief overview, but I promise at some point on this podcast, we will talk about all of these in depth. So the first one we want to talk about is vestibular neuritis and labyrinthitis. So this is an infection in the inner ear in your vestibulocochlear nerve that causes inflammation and therefore presses on the nerve, because inflammation in a tiny, tiny place, there's nowhere for it to go. And so it damages that vestibulocochlear nerve. Now, this can affect just the vestibular part of the vestibulocochlear nerve and just the labyrinth part, or that's not what I'm trying to say, the cochlear part of the vestibulocochlear nerve. And I think there are also some models that show that the labyrinth itself can be infected. But regardless, it's a peripheral dysfunction where it's happening not in the central part of the nerves, but rather in the peripheral part. And that neuritis or labyrinthitis is importantly a decrease in function in one side or the other of that nerve and the way it fires to your brain. Labyrinthitis being different as it causes hearing loss as well.
Yeah, I think there's so many different options as to where it could be going because it's hard to always know because we're usually seeing this stuff after the fact. I think there's maybe some studies out there of testing while this is actively happening, but it's probably very few, far between. And someone give those people a medal that did that testing while they're in an active neuritis or labyrinthitis because that is just horrible. I
Totally.
think I think there's the studies of did anesthesia or something to their vestibular cochlear nerve, epidural or something, but like somehow they did it to their vestibular cochlear nerve. So they just like
Jeez,
had the
I don't remember this.
it was at
I
the
believe you.
it was at the vestibular conference
Oh, yeah. Okay.
in
Now I know what you're talking
Minneapolis.
about.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay. So self-induced vestibular neuritis as a study.
yes, to try to like track
Yes.
it and like better outline it. But I don't know if there's any like super active attacks, and it could go in a lot of different ways. There's the nerve, the labyrinth, a combination of it all because they just can't really know for sure where it got impacted until there's the testing after. And even then, I know people still kind of want to know, but why? Or like, why this one? Or why this side? Why this part? And that's when we just don't really know the answer. And I know the next question tends to be, well, is it going to happen again? And for the most part, it's very, very low that it would happen again. If it does seem to happen again, there's more of that episodicness to it. Then we're going to start thinking, is this more like a Meniere's or are we like seeing something like a one-time neuritis, but now we're seeing something like vestibular migraine kind of combining, and now we're having to tease that apart, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, for sure. I think everyone's like, well, I'm missing my function on one side. Not everyone, but many people are like, I'm missing my function on one side. And so this is making things a little bit more difficult. And now this virus is inside of me. And I used to say, well, you can't usually get the same virus twice. I will say that this comes from a similar or the same virus as something that would give you chickenpox as a kid, or shingles as an adult. So, like herpes simplex virus is typically what we associate with vestibular neuritis and labyrinthitis, just affecting you in a different place. But for some reason, you can't get it twice typically. Typically, I know someone's going to come at me for I got it twice. Yes, you can. It is possible. I've seen it happen. I am not invalidating that. I've seen it in the clinic. In grad school, I saw it happen. So this is something to be aware that is possible. It's just the less likely scenario. It's incredibly unlikely. And I remember someone said, well, you've seen it once, so you'll probably never see it again. So it is unlikely to get bilateral vestibular hypofunction from a bilateral vestibular neuritis. All right, the next one we're going to talk about is Meniere's disease on our list. So Meniere's disease is the inability of your inner ear for some reason or another, and there are many, many theories behind this, it's unable to regulate its own pressure. So there's two kinds of fluid in your inner ear. You have endolymph and you have perilymph. One is a sodium-based fluid. The other is a potassium-based fluid. The sodium-based fluid is the endolymph. And when we're thinking about these, they can kind of like osmose back and forth, if you remember that word from high school bio, where basically fluid travels from one side of a membrane to another side of a membrane to make up for whichever one has more stuff in it. So if there's more sodium, more stuff, more fluid is going to go into the sodium side. If there's more potassium, more fluid is going to go in the potassium side. So keeping those even is really important. But for some reason, for some people who have Meniere's disease, there's an inability to do that function. And it's not something we know why it happens. So there's a lot of theories. Some people say it's autoimmune, other people say it's a viral issue with a herpes type style virus. Some people say it's a migraine variant. Some people say it's a genetic problem. Some people say it is what you eat and your lifestyle problem. There is not one good answer. And I find if you've seen one person with Meniere's disease as a provider, you've seen one person with Meniere's disease.
Yeah, I think this is one of those areas where we know enough to kind of identify it or get some of the basis down of what's going on, but that's where it starts to get cloudy and murky again. And I think that's where people run into a lot of frustrations and roadblocks when you're having it because they can't predict, like, are you going to have it every once in a while, like are you going to have it a lot, how much is it going to impact you? Like sometimes people might have it once every few years. Some people, it's like they get into the cycle of like every month, or how much is it going to impact their hearing, since part of diagnosing Meniere's disease is when they start seeing those hearing changes on an hearing test.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there is some value and some correctness probably in every single one of the reasons that people might be getting these attacks. And just like you said, inherently, it is a spontaneous idiopathic disorder. So spontaneous meaning it happens randomly, and idiopathic meaning we don't know why it happens. And there is a secondary type of Meniere's disease. So Meniere's disease is fancy name is primary endolymphatic hydrops, and its like cousin is secondary endolymphatic hydrops, and that is the type that's not idiopathic. So we know why it happens, and it's not progressive. So Meniere's disease will progress over time, where your hearing will likely get worse and the tinnitus will likely get worse. There are things that will get worse with Meniere's disease. Your vestibular function will probably get worse over more time, which is why it's important to do your best to treat it, which I know everyone's doing their best to treat their vestibular disorder, and it's hard to do. But the secondary endolymphatic hydrops is not progressive. It's typically associated with just like more earfulness and dizziness and less like severe spinning that's lasting for long periods of time. And people will be like, well, every time I get allergies, this will happen. And I think it's something we often forget to talk about is secondary endolymphatic hydrops.
Yes, or they just kind of rope it in with Meniere's, even though it is different, because people, it's more about finding patterns. I feel like you can get a little bit more of a pattern if you're breaking it down or maybe tracking things when you start noticing. And Meniere's, it's some people can sense more of a pattern, some people can't. And again, it's hard to know if you're going to be able to find those patterns just based on what might be going on.
Totally. All right, so next one is BPPV, which is the shortened name for a very long diagnosis called benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, which is room spinning vertigo in certain positions only. It's not something that's going to happen when you're just sitting here. If you're sitting here listening to this and all of a sudden the room is spinning and you've not really moved your head, that is not BPPV. And I want to be very clear about that. BPPV will happen in the same plane of movement every single time you move that way until it's treated. So benign, it's not going to kill you. Paroxysmal, it's going to be something that is in short bursts. Positional, it happens in certain positions. And vertigo, so the incorrect perception that you or the room around you is moving, sliding, or spinning. And this is what everyone calls the ear crystal problem. Does everyone call it where that to you too? I feel like everyone's like, oh, I know what vertigo is. It's that ear crystal thing.
Yeah, the ear rocks, the crystals, or they start moving their head. And my dad recently was like, yeah, I think I have that ear thing. And I was like, ear thing. He's like, well, if I lay back and I turn my head a certain way, like it just starts going. So I just avoid that. If I roll and I start to feel it, I just roll out of it. And then it doesn't bother me at all. Like he just went water skiing and he will cut really hard, and he's going like 35 and he's not worried about it one bit doing this stuff. Meanwhile, I'm like, hey, I like treat that. So if that's really what it is, we can check and see if that's what it is and then do something about it. He's like, well, it only bothers me in those positions and it's only when I'm like sleeping. So I don't really care. And it's like, well, that's a very nice, calm demeanor about it, but we really should get it treated, even if it only bothers you in those times and you're able to avoid it. Like if there's an issue and it's a easy fix, in a couple sessions, easy coded, but it's good to address it just so it's not there, right? Because you can have a higher risk of falls. I'm like, what if you're on a ladder and you're like cleaning out a gutter and you don't realize that your head is in that position and now you're on a ladder right by your gutter? Totally. Get it addressed, even if it only bothers you in certain times. But he's also the person that won't go to the doctor until it's like super, super, super bad. So I'm not surprised when he told me that. And that's his decision. And as long as he knows the information, he can always decide to do what he wants.
Making an informed decision is a good thing. And like you said, it can definitely lead to higher risk of falls. And it's an important thing to get treated if you can get it treated. But this also goes to show like how different people's demeanors about these symptoms are. Like you have your dad who is like, oh, I think I have this thing. When I like roll over, I spin at night. And it's like, that's a really scary thing if you don't know what it is, right? And even if you, when you do know what it is, it's still frightening or frustrating or makes you feel sick or whatever. And then we have some people who are like, I am going to need you to tell me exactly what you're doing the entire time because this is so, so, so fear provoking for me. And I think it's an important thing to remember that, like, hey, this is different for each person. So if like, I've had BPPV and that is not my experience. Like I am not water skiing with BPPV, right? That is totally fine. But if you are also the person who's like, I think I might have BPPV, like a patient the other day told me, I think I have BPPV, but I like the control because I know that I can get rid of it when I move. And I was like, you still got to get that treated. So there are two very different camps of people. And then of course, there are people in between too. But no matter what your experience with BPPV and the symptoms are, that is okay. It's normal. And most regular, I mean, by regular, I mean any physical therapist is able to treat BPPV. So you don't necessarily always need a vestibular specialist unless something is like coming up kind of funky, you can't get it treated, something like that, then it's always good to get an eval with a vestibular PT. But most physical therapists, if you're like, I live in a rural area, how am I supposed to do this, are great for this. And then also the app, little plug for our friend Cheryl, the physical therapist, the app Healing Vertigo is super, super, super helpful. It's like $12 on the App Store and it will walk you through how to treat BPPV.
Yeah, I feel like BPPV, like all PTs know what it is and know that we're the ones that see these people to treat them. I mean, sometimes ENTs, but usually they're sending them to PT. But it falls into this area of how confident do they feel. And if you're in rural areas, usually, you know, a rural physical therapist is used to this, like, I'm going into the unknown. I'm not super sure what's going on, but as long as they feel confident in, hey, let's figure this out together. And I feel comfortable of doing what's within my scope. And when I feel like it's outside my scope, I'm referring on. Like, hopefully you can work together and trust each other and figure out a plan.
Totally. Those rural PTs are typically pretty resourceful.
Yes.
Yes, for sure. All right. Superior canal dehiscence syndrome. This is also a mechanical issue. So this is not a neurological thing that's going on, but it's a rare condition, one of the rarer of the vestibular conditions, which is an abnormal closure or not complete closure, so a hole of the bony canals in the inner ear. Now you can have the syndrome without having the defect, and some people can have the defect and I think not have so many symptoms. So it can kind of go both ways, but the defect of like the hole itself doesn't necessarily have to be there. You could have a big thinning of the bone or something like that and still have these symptoms. And you'll have a lot of like hearing loss and distorted sound and something called the Tullio effect, which is hearing a loud, sudden sound causes vertigo. And that's because it's moving the fluid through your ear in an incorrect way due to sound waves. It's triggered by those loud noises. And then other intracranial pressures like sneezing, coughing, stuff like that can also cause similar symptoms.
Yes. And I know there's also those like distorted hearing, like you said, or this sensation of like finer tuned hearing, like you can hear more like internal functions that you might not normally, that people will describe as like, I just feel like I can hear what's going on inside my body in a way that I wasn't hearing before.
There's actually a superior canal dehiscence syndrome Grey's Anatomy episode, and I'm looking it up. I think it's in 2010. And I remember watching this and being like, what is that? I was a big Grey's Anatomy person in college. But there was a woman, I think she was a younger person, like their daughter, a parent of a daughter, and the parent was like, I think being maybe accused of Munchausen's by proxy or the daughter being mentally ill or something like that. But she actually had autophony, which is the ability to hear their body stuff like on loudspeaker. So like blood moving through her veins and stuff like that. It was like driving her to have like psych evals and stuff like that. But it was SCDS. So you might have dizziness, vertigo, lots of different symptoms, but that hearing distorted situation is really the big giveaway for SCVS. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, I remembered that the other day. Bilateral vestibular loss. So this is a loss on both sides of your vestibular systems. And it can be from lots of different places. Sometimes it's inherited, sometimes it's genetic, sometimes you're born with it. Sometimes it happens over time or with different medications or drugs that you may have been given in your life to treat other stuff. So I know we were talking about over the weekend, Jenna and I never stopped talking about vestibular disorders, about someone who had sepsis and ended up with bilateral vestibular loss because of a bunch of ototoxic or ear toxic drugs that they had been given to save their lives, but their vestibular loss was decreased at the end of that. So in order to have official vestibular loss, you have to have less than 5% of function on either side or on both sides. So combined, it's 10 because you add them together when you do this little equation. But I think it's 5 or less percent is the percentage, unless I'm mistaken.
I think you start with degrees. So there's if it's less than 6 degrees of eye movement when they're watching this, the calorics, so 12 combined. And then when they start turning it into percentages, I'm like, wait, how do we get from degrees to percentages? Someone walk it through. I walking for the first time.
Yeah, reading those reports is not always the easiest, and that is why audiologists are such phenomenal human beings who we love. But that bilateral vestibular loss, it is a specific amount on your VNG testing that you'll be able to see, or if they're that you had literally no function on either side, you had no response on either side, we'll get you that diagnosis as well.
The one thing I did take away from me trying to understand it and going, I'm not an audiologist, so I'm going to talk to one, was that if you are getting this absolutely zero type thing, they should be either saying, let me recheck or let me make sure the equipment is working, or they might even say, come back in another time, or maybe you go to a different ENT or something. If you're getting complete zeros and you don't feel like the other typical areas that we would see with a bilateral loss are applying to you, then making sure that you're getting some additional testing to make sure that wasn't a false positive.
Absolutely. And something to note about bilateral before we move on is that you are going to have more imbalance and difficulty walking in the dark than you will dizziness. So you're like, oh my God, I have so much dizziness. It's typically not described as dizzy. It's typically, I feel like I lose my balance a lot and I have a lot of gaze instability, and all of the gaze instability exercises I do just do not make it better. That is typically what we're looking for when it comes to bilateral vestibular loss. All right, and then that last one, acoustic neuroma. So that is a slow growing benign, so non-cancerous tumor in your brain, or not in your brain. It is in your vestibular nerve, pushing against that, growing from the Schwann cells on your vestibulocochlear nerve. And it's super slow growing. Most people have no idea it's there, of course, until something happens. So it might have been there for years and years and you would have no idea, but it can push on your facial nerve, which runs right next to your vestibulocochlear nerve, another one of those vestibular nerves. And of course, it can affect your hearing. It can affect your balance. It can affect your gaze stability. All of those vestibular symptoms that we think of, it can affect.
I know, again, everyone's different, where sometimes people might say, all right, let's just try to be as conservative as possible. You always have the option. Probably at a certain point, your doctor will just say to hey, we can operate if you want, but if you want to just keep holding off, we can. And they might just say, let me do vestibular therapy and see where we're at. And sometimes we get to this point where it's in the patient's hands of, all right, do I want to just keep doing it this way, or do I just want to have the operation and kind of move on to the next phase of management here?
Totally. And I think it's important to remember that everyone's going to handle this very differently. So in acoustic neuroma, the woman we bought our house from had an acoustic neuroma, and she was very much watch and wait for over 10 years. And that's because she knew when it grew. And she'd be like, I know it's going to grow, or it just grew because I'm feeling a little bit dizzier, a little bit off balance. And this is what I do for myself. There is not a vestibular therapist in Wyoming before I moved here, really. And so she also lives part of the year in rural Michigan. And so she'd say, okay, I know this got bigger. So I'm going to do my balance exercises and cross country ski extra. And then she compensates. And then until it grows again, she's all good. So I thought that was a really interesting anecdote. Again, some people need it removed immediately, and other people just can kind of live with it and don't. And it really depends on how big it is, how fast it's growing, and how it affects your personal life.
Yeah, it reminds me, this is more, I guess it could be like an acoustic neuroma or like a neuritis, like some sort of like a hypofunction type of system where the person's like, I work on two monitors and like I have to look around a lot. So again, that's something that a lot of people have issues with, especially if there's like that gaze stability, head movements, if you're doing that. But they like love video games. Like that was their outlet. That's the thing they do. That's how they like connect with their friends. So they're like, I wasn't going to stop playing video games because of this. So they just kind of kept at it. I think they would take some breaks to keep it manageable, but then they just kept playing video games. And by the time I was seeing them, they're like, it really doesn't bother me that much anymore. Like it was at first, but I just took breaks and I just wanted to keep playing the thing that I enjoyed until it just got better and better. And I was like, you just like rehab yourself. Like you don't need me.
Totally. And again, this is where, just like you said, everyone's different. Where like some people that's going to work super well for, and some people like, I just keep trying to push through and it's not working. And so I think seeing like that person was like, well, I came to therapy anyway, just to like get evaluated is always a good idea.
Yeah. I was like, when did you take breaks or how did you take breaks? Like, I think it was kind of this nice mix of like, yeah, they just were kind of doing the right things, whether they really felt that way or not, or they had prior experience with other things of like, hey, this is how I'm going to like listen to my body and give it a rest. And I'm just going to apply it in the same instance. I didn't interrogate them that much, but sometimes I'm like, wow, like the stars really align for you in that sense. And that's not how everyone shows up, or my job would be like pretty easy.
Obsolete. Yeah, we'd have no job if that was the way everyone.
I was like, which people could do it that way, great. But
I'd be happy to be out of a job if no one was dizzy anymore. Okay, so outcomes, prognosis with peripheral disorders. So when the peripheral vestibular system is impacted, the input towards your central vestibular system, so the input towards your brain is what's going on and kind of a miss in this scenario. So again, you can have both, but we're talking about them separately. The central system, so your brain is incredibly plastic. Its ability to move and change is unmatched, like truly unmatched. And so it can be adapted to. So when you have a hypofunction, when you have a decrease in function on one side, your brain is going to learn and adapt, which is pretty cool and pretty amazing. And it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take time and repetitions and rest breaks and pacing and exercise and mindset and like all of these things that we talk so much about on Instagram and are going to talk more about on this podcast. But you also have to give your brain a little bit of slack and say, right now, this thing is harder for me. And what am I going to do in order to help myself adjust?
Yes. And for that, it always makes me think of learning a language, or maybe not even a whole language, because hopefully everyone thinks that, well, most people would appreciate how that's challenging. I know some people are very good at it, but most people would be like, this is going to take some time.
Totally.
And so I always like to think of it as the old school way of writing English, like in the Constitution, like all their S's were F's, I think.
Interesting.
I've said that to people, they don't believe me, so I like looked it up, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Like all the S's were F's, or it's something like that, where I'm like, okay, imagine if the way we know everything, they just took one letter and they said, we're going to spell everything the same, but instead of using an S, it's going to have an F now. When we read stuff, we're probably still going to be able to read it to a point, but it's going to take longer. It's going to seem kind of confusing, but like we'll kind of figure it out. Like, I don't want to read a whole book, but I can maybe read a sentence. And over time, you start to figure it out, you get better at it, and you could just like read your entire beach read without an issue. So I think of it kind of that way, where we're just changing things a little bit. And you've probably had something in your life where you're like, wait a second, this is kind of tough. This is hard. And you're learning something new and you start to pick it up and get better at it. And when you're moving, it kind of forces you to have to start to figure that out.
Totally. Totally. And I know I like your F and S's, and now I'm staring at this page, like replacing all of these S's with F's in my brain and trying to read it. And it is hard. So I think that's a good thing. But also we have to remember, to your point, that when we're trying to learn and relearn these things, the amount of dizziness that causes anxiety is really high, and anxiety hinders neuroplasticity in a way because it's causing more of that negative neuroplasticity. So like F's and S's aren't going to cause the fear that dizziness is going to cause. So like imagine you're being chased by a lion and also trying to switch all your S's and F's. And so those two things at the same time, it's going to be almost impossible
The directions to the way out to avoid the next bear or lion are written with the S's and the F's switched.
Exactly. Exactly. And so it's like, that is a way, way, way harder thing. So knowing that it is possible and you will get there, but that it's going to take time and commitment and you're gonna have to do new things and try new things and face fears and all of that at the same time, is going to be super, super important.
Yeah. And I think that plays into the idea too of we need to start in a easy to approach spot. Like, let's just be able to sit and read the letter switching. And eventually we want to work up to it so you can be moving and dodging, ducking, hurtling over tree roots and things to still be reading those signs. So I think it's a nice way to think of like, we want to get good at one thing, but we want to keep building off of that. So you're doing what you want to do.
Absolutely. Remember that it's always an option. All right. And with that, I think we're going to take us out. So you can find me on Instagram at the Vertigo Doctor. You can find Dr. Jenna at dizzy_rehab_therapist and the podcast at grounded.vestibular.pod. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to our channel wherever you are watching or listening to this. If you're interested in working with us, try Vestibular Group Fit, the affordable, comprehensive program that focuses on movement, mindset, support, and education to take you from feeling frustrated and dizzy to feeling in control of your vestibular disorder. Or we can work together one-on-one with either myself or Dr. Jenna in California, Virginia, Maryland, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, Wyoming, and Wisconsin. Your success story begins today. Dizziness does not have to be forever. Let's get you the right tools to thrive. We love you, and we'll see you next time on Grounded. Have a great day.